Institute laying out a tax reform plan to hold corporations accountable, create jobs, and boost the economy. Joseph Stiglitz, welcome.
In the wake of the health care reform passage, fell flat on its.
The criminal justice system needs reform. We know that there are 2.3 million people.
Passing criminal justice reform, attacking the opioids.
Congress needs to pass comprehensive reform of the claims appeal.
Communities and families all across the country. So we need Congress to reform our federal sentencing laws for nonviolent drug offenses.
Let's not question the reform or the sentencing and how people are being.
Ask you next, which is educational reform, is something that you're very passionate about. So let me rephrase the question and to ask.
Then I'm happy to work with you on tax reform that could potentially lower everybody's.
To reform mathematics, to reform teaching. And then come.
Reform means to me, or what I think needs to happen to really have ed reform. First of all, is
thinking about corporate tax reform, but I think it's really overshadowed by the bigger problems that are kind of layered on top of these distortions. One,
Melson can accomplish, then and only then have we realized our vision for education reform. Thank you.
Project, I think we've moved the ball forward on thinking about tax reform, and I encourage everyone to contact either one.
And finally, when it comes to reform, I think they will see that all of the spending categories
after welfare reform. Now, since the early 2000s, I have to say, I'm not sure we've kept focused on those core principles.
To me, that was the best reform that we've ever passed because it required.
I think you were still in junior high when President Clinton signed the welfare reform bill.
And then Tuesday night say, but we're going to reform that because it doesn't work for us.
What about property tax reform? Not just relief, but reform. A renewed interest in some kind of campaign finance reform. Senator Casper from Fargo has a bill.
There's also efforts at reform going on in WHO to make sure that WHO or others are ready for the governance. Who's in charge?
Right, this created enormous disruption in the school reform world. People who used to work together became.
So we think our system is actually making our reform is actually making the system more progressive.
And so I think it's important for those who support, as I do, immigration reform and pathways to citizenship for
economy, because that's important to why we decided to pursue this reform.
Right, and so this is a.
Before it was drafted, healthcare reform was put forward as an economic.
And consequences. What we really need is sectoral reform. We need to look at
wave of market reform against all the vested interests. And so far, it doesn't look like.
Defense capability do we need, and for what? How to reform Pentagon spending. With a polarized, paralyzed Congress is a coherent.
One of the